Section 11 of Confessions of an English Opium Eater. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Martin Geeson. Confessions of an English Opium Eater by Thomas de Quincey. Section 11. If any man, poor or rich, were to say that he would tell us what had been the happiest day in his life, and the why and the wherefore, I suppose that we should all cry out, "Hear him, hear him." As to the happiest day, that must be very difficult for any wise man to name, because any event that could occupy so distinguished a place in a man's retrospect of his life, or be entitled to have shed a special felicity on any one day, ought to be of such an enduring character as that, accidents apart, it should have continued to shed the same felicity, or one not distinguishably less, on many years together. To the happiest lustrum, however, or even to the happiest year, it may be allowed to any man to point, without discountenance from wisdom. This year, in my case, reader, was the one which we have now reached, though it stood, I confess, as a parenthesis between years of a gloomier character. It was a year of brilliant water, to speak after the manner of jewellers, set, as it were, and insulated in the gloom and cloudy melancholy of opium. Strange as it may sound, I had a little before this time descended suddenly, and without any considerable effort, from 320 grains of opium, i.e. 8,000 drops of laudanum per day, to 40 grains, or 1/8 part. Instantaneously, and as if by magic, the cloud of profoundest melancholy which rested upon my brain, like some black vapours that I have seen roll away from the summits of mountains, drew off in one day, νυχτέμερον, passed off with its murky banners as simultaneously as a ship that has been stranded and is floated off by a spring tide, that moveth all together if it move at all. Now then I was again happy. I now took only 1,000 drops of laudanum per day. And what was that? A latter spring had come to close up the season of youth. My brain performed its functions as healthily as ever before. I read Kant again, and again I understood him, or fancied that I did. Again my feelings of pleasure expanded themselves to all around me, and if any man from Oxford or Cambridge, or from neither, had been announced to me in my unpretending cottage, I should have welcomed him with as sumptuous a reception as so poor a man could offer. Whatever else was wanting to a wise man's happiness, of laudanum I would have given him as much as he wished, and in a golden cup. And by the way, now that I speak of giving laudanum away, I remember about this time a little incident, which I mention because, trifling as it was, the reader will soon meet it again in my dreams, which it influenced more fearfully than could be imagined. One day a Malay knocked at my door. What business a Malay could have to transact among English mountains, I cannot conjecture, but possibly he was on his road to a seaport about 40 miles distant. The servant who opened the door to him was a young girl, born and bred amongst the mountains, who had never seen an Asiatic dress of any sort. His turban, therefore, confounded her not a little. and as it turned out that his attainments in English were exactly of the same extent as hers in the Malay, there seemed to be an impassable gulf fixed between all communication of ideas, if either party had happened to possess any. In this dilemma, the girl, recollecting the reputed learning of her master, and doubtless giving me credit for a knowledge of all the languages of the earth, besides perhaps a few of the lunar ones, came and gave me to understand that there was some sort of demon below, whom she clearly imagined that my art could exorcise from the house. I did not immediately go down, but when I did, the group which presented itself, arranged as it was by accident, though not very elaborate, took hold of my fancy and my eye in a way that none of the statuesque attitudes exhibited in the ballets at the opera house, though so ostentatiously complex, had ever done. In a cottage kitchen, but panelled on the wall with dark wood that from age and rubbing resembled oak, and looking more like a rustic hall of entrance than a kitchen, stood the Malay, his turban and loose trousers of dingy white relieved upon the dark panelling. He had placed himself nearer to the girl than she seemed to relish, though her native spirit of mountain intrepidity contended with the feeling of simple awe which her countenance expressed as she gazed upon the tiger cat before her. And a more striking picture there could not be imagined than the beautiful English face of the girl, and its exquisite fairness, together with her erect and independent attitude, contrasted with the sallow and bilious skin of the Malay, enamelled or veneered with mahogany by marine air, his small, fierce, restless eyes, thin lips, slavish gestures and adorations. Half hidden by the ferocious-looking Malay was a little child from a neighbouring cottage who had crept in after him, and was now in the act of reverting its head and gazing upwards at the turban and the fiery eyes beneath it, whilst with one hand he caught at the dress of the young woman for protection. My knowledge of the Oriental tongues is not remarkably extensive, being indeed confined to 2 words, the Arabic word for barley, and the Turkish for opium, madjun, which I have learned from Anastasius; and as I had neither a Malay dictionary, nor even Adelung's Mithridates, which might have helped me to a few words, I addressed him in some lines from the Iliad, considering that of such languages as I possessed, Greek, in point of longitude, came geographically nearest to an Oriental one. He worshipped me in a most devout manner, and replied in what I suppose was Malay. In this way I saved my reputation with my neighbours, for the Malay had no means of betraying the secret. He lay down upon the floor for about an hour, and then pursued his journey. On his departure, I presented him with a piece of opium. To him, as an Orientalist, I concluded that opium must be familiar, and the expression of his face convinced me that it was. Nevertheless, I was struck with some little consternation when I saw him suddenly raise his hand to his mouth, and, to use the schoolboy phrase, bolt the whole, divided into 3 pieces, at one mouthful. The quantity was enough to kill 3 dragoons and their horses, and I felt some alarm for the poor creature. But what could be done? I had given him the opium in compassion for his solitary life, on recollecting that if he had travelled on foot from London, it must be nearly 3 weeks since he could have exchanged a thought with any human being. I could not think of violating the laws of hospitality by having him seized and drenched with an emetic, and thus frightening him into a notion that we were going to sacrifice him to some English idol. No, there was clearly no help for it. He took his leave, and for some days I felt anxious, but as I never heard of any Malay being found dead, I became convinced that he was used to opium, and that I must have done him the service I designed by giving him one night of respite from the pains of wandering. This incident I have digressed to mention, because this Malay, partly from the picturesque exhibition he assisted to frame, partly from the anxiety I connected with his image for some days, fastened afterwards upon my dreams, and brought other Malays with him, worse than himself, that ran amuck at me and led me into a world of troubles. But to quit this episode, and to return to my intercalary year of happiness. I have said already that on a subject so important to us all as happiness, we should listen with pleasure to any man's experience or experiments, even though he were but a ploughboy, who cannot be supposed to have ploughed very deep into such an intractable soil as that of human pains and pleasures, or to have conducted his researches upon any very enlightened principles. But I, who have taken happiness both in a solid and liquid shape, both boiled and unboiled, both East India and Turkey, who have conducted my experiments upon this interesting subject with a sort of galvanic battery, and have, for the general benefit of the world, inoculated myself, as it were, with the poison of 8,000 drops of laudanum per day, just for the same reason as a French surgeon inoculated himself lately with cancer, an English one 20 years ago with plague, and a third, I know not of what nation, with hydrophobia. I, it will be admitted, must surely know what happiness is, if anybody does. And therefore I will here lay down an analysis of happiness, and as the most interesting mode of communicating it, I will give it not didactically, but wrapped up and involved in a picture of one evening, as I spent every evening during the intercalary year, when laudanum, though taken daily, was to me no more than the elixir of pleasure. This done, I shall quit the subject of happiness altogether, and pass to a very different one, the pains of opium. Let there be a cottage standing in a valley, 18 miles from any town. No spacious valley, but about 2 miles long by 3/4 of a mile in average width, the benefit of which provision is that all the family resident within its circuit will compose, as it were, one larger household, personally familiar to your eye, and more or less interesting to your affections. Let the mountains be real mountains, between 3,000 and 4,000 feet high, and the cottage a real cottage, not, as a witty author has it, a cottage with a double coach house. Let it be, in fact, for I must abide by the actual scene, a white cottage embowered with flowering shrubs, so chosen as to unfold a succession of flowers upon the walls, and clustering round the windows through all the months of spring, summer, and autumn, beginning in fact with May roses and ending with jasmine. Let it, however, not be spring, nor summer, nor autumn, but winter in his sternest shape. This is a most important point in the science of happiness, and I am surprised to see people overlook it and think it matter of congratulation that winter is going, or, if coming, is not likely to be a severe one. On the contrary, I put up a petition annually for as much snow, hail, frost, or storm, of one kind or other, as the skies can possibly afford us. Surely everybody is aware of the divine pleasures which attend a winter fireside: candles at 4 o'clock, warm hearthrugs, tea, a fair tea-maker, shutters closed, curtains flowing in ample draperies on the floor, whilst the wind and rain are raging audibly without, and at the doors and windows seem to call, as heaven and earth they would together mell, yet the least entrance find they none at all, whence sweeter grows our rest, secure in Massey Hall. Castle of Indolence. All these are items in the description of a winter evening, which must surely be familiar to everybody born in a high latitude. And it is evident that most of these delicacies, like ice cream, require a very low temperature of the atmosphere to produce them. They are fruits which cannot be ripened without weather stormy or inclement in some way or other. I am not particular, as people say, whether it be snow or black frost, or wind so strong that, as Mr. says, you may lean your back against it like a post. I can put up even with rain, provided it rains cats and dogs, but something of the sort I must have, and if I have it not, I think myself in a manner ill-used. For why am I called upon to pay so heavily for winter, in coals and candles, and various privations that will occur even to gentlemen, if I am not to have the article good of its kind? No, a Canadian winter for my money, or a Russian one, where every man is but a co-proprietor with the north wind in the fee simple of his own ears. Indeed, so great an epicure am I in this matter, that I cannot relish a winter night fully if it be much past St. Thomas's Day, and have degenerated into disgusting tendencies to vernal appearances. No, it must be divided by a thick wall of dark nights from all return of light and sunshine. From the latter weeks of October to Christmas Eve, therefore, is the period during which happiness is in season, which, in my judgment, enters the room with the tea-tray. For tea, though ridiculed by those who are naturally of coarse nerves, or are become so from wine drinking, and are not susceptible of influence from so refined a stimulant, will always be the favourite beverage of the intellectual. And for my part, I would have joined Dr. Johnson in a bellum internecinum, Reader's translation, a struggle to the death, against Jonas Hanway, or any other impious person who should presume to disparage it. But here, to save myself the trouble of too much verbal description, I will introduce a painter, and give him directions for the rest of the picture. Painters do not like white cottages, unless a good deal weather-stained, But as the reader now understands that it is a winter night, his services will not be required except for the inside of the house. Paint me, then, a room 17 feet by 12, and not more than 7½ feet high. This, reader, is somewhat ambitiously styled in my family the drawing room, but being contrived a double debt to pay, it is also, and more justly, termed the library. For it happens that books are the only article of property in which I am richer than my neighbours. Of these I have about 5,000, collected gradually since my 18th year. Therefore, painter, put as many as you can into this room, make it populous with books, and furthermore paint me a good fire, and furniture plain and modest, befitting the unpretending cottage of a scholar. And near the fire paint me a tea table, and as it is clear that no creature can come to see one such a stormy night, place only 2 cups and saucers on the tea tray. And if you know how to paint such a thing symbolically or otherwise, paint me an eternal teapot, eternal a parte ante and a parte post, for I usually drink tea from 8 o'clock at night to 4 o'clock in the morning. And as it is very unpleasant to make tea or to pour it out for oneself, paint me a lovely young woman sitting at the table. Paint her arms like Aurora's, and her smiles like Hebe's. But no, dear M., not even in jest let me insinuate that thy power to illuminate my cottage rests upon a tenure so perishable as mere personal beauty, or that the witchcraft of angelic smiles lies within the empire of any earthly pencil. Pass, then, my good painter, to something more within its power, and the next article brought forward should naturally be myself, a picture of the opium eater, with his little golden receptacle of the pernicious drug lying beside him on the table. As to the opium, I have no objection to see a picture of that, though I would rather see the original. You may paint it if you choose, but I apprise you that no little receptacle would, even in 1816, answer my purpose, who was at a distance from the stately Pantheon and all druggists, mortal or otherwise. No, you may as well paint the real receptacle, which was not of gold, but of glass, and as much like a wine decanter as possible. Into this you may put a quart of ruby-coloured laudanum. That and a book of German metaphysics placed by its side will sufficiently attest my being in the neighbourhood. But as to myself, there I demur. I admit that naturally I ought to occupy the foreground of the picture, that being the hero of the piece, or if you choose, the criminal at the bar, my body should be had into court. This seems reasonable, but why should I confess on this point to a painter, or why confess at all? If the public, into whose private ear I am confidentially whispering my confessions, and not into any painter's, should chance to have framed some agreeable picture for itself of the opium eater's exterior, should have ascribed to him romantically an elegant person or a handsome face, why should I barbarously tear from it so pleasing a delusion, pleasing both to the public and to me? No, paint me, if at all, according to your own fancy, and as a painter's fancy should teem with beautiful creations, I cannot fail in that way to be a gainer. And now, reader, we have run through all the 10 categories of my condition as it stood about 1816 to 17, up to the middle of which latter year I judge myself to have been a happy man. And the elements of that happiness I have endeavoured to place before you in the above sketch of the interior of a scholar's library, in a cottage among the mountains, on a stormy winter evening. But now, farewell, a long farewell to happiness, winter or summer. Farewell to smiles and laughter. Farewell to peace of mind. Farewell to hope and to tranquil dreams and to the blessed consolations of sleep. For more than 3 years and a half I am summoned away from these. I am now arrived at an Iliad of woes, for I have now to record the pains of opium. End of section 11. Recording by Martin Geeson in Hazelmere, Surrey.